Welcome to the Super Gamer Podcast. Welcome to the new Super Gamer Podcast, episode 139. Our guest this week has a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering, has done soundtrack work, game soundtrack work on more than 40 games, ranging from Mega Man to Phantasy Star to Bomberman, plays the chiptune in martial art band, or martial art, VGM enthusiast, vinyl record collector, does artwork and live visualization, has done so at MagFest, for example. And the reason we even set up this interview, did a panel at VGM together just a few weeks back. We have Jeff Roberts, JMR. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. You've really done your research with that introduction there.
Thank you. To be fair, I took them mostly from different bios that you wrote, so...
Fair enough.
But we'll start with the panel, which was just October 23rd-ish. And it's titled, What You Are Missing When Listening to VGM Rips on YouTube. And as I understood it, basically, the gist of it, you said generally not much, but if you know what you're looking for, the sound quality's a little poorer sometimes, not all, and there are errors, glitches maybe. Maybe you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, so the gist of the panel was that not every source for video game music that you'll find online, especially with regards to, your classic video game music, not every source is created equally. And the panel was kind of discussing some of the common issues that you'll find on video game music that's disseminated online on YouTube and other sources, some of the issues that you'll find there, and the effort that someone like myself would put into recording a proper, perfect recording of a game soundtrack for a soundtrack album. So like you mentioned at the top, I worked on soundtrack albums for approximately 40 games. I haven't worked on the actual music myself. I'm not the composer or anything, but I am the person who provided the audio for a growing number of soundtrack album releases.
But you do your own music as well.
Oh, that is correct. Yeah, I do dabble in both. I'm kind of playing both sides of the fence.
Is one more nerve-wracking than the other, or harder than the other, do you find?
Definitely. It's honestly the recording work that I do for the soundtrack albums that is probably the most nerve-wracking, because I have to pay respect to someone else's music. I have to make sure that I am capturing it in a way that, the person who would have composed it has to be able to stand by the work that I'm doing. So I'm being held to their standard, not my own. Whereas if I'm doing like whatever I do with the band or my own individual solo projects, the only person I really have to please there is myself. I'm probably a lot easier to satisfy.
And looking... Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like when I'm working on the soundtrack releases, I'm not only like upholded to like the composer and the publishers of the game, I'm also liable for pleasing or displeasing legions of fans, right? Like if you're working on something like a Mega Man Legends soundtrack, that game has a pretty devoted, rabid fan base, and if you screw up something in the music they're probably going to notice, and you don't want to be the one responsible for that.
Do you ever get people mad, like maybe they're familiar or more familiar with, a worse version, and they're like, you didn't do it justice?
I haven't had that feedback come my way yet. I have seen that type of response go to other official soundtrack releases, not ones that I've worked on, but ones put out by other labels. And yeah, I have seen the wrath of the fan base, basically. Now, I've also seen the side effects of that. I've seen cases where a label has put out, an album with questionable sound quality. If you refer back to the panel that I hosted, I mentioned the Castlevania 1 vinyl release. There was a backlash to that soundtrack release, and Mondo's Castlevania 2 and 3 releases were significantly better in sound quality. I believe they sourced brand new recordings for those releases. So yeah, I've going back to your question, yeah, I have seen the wrath of the fan community, the VGM fan community, present itself, rear its ugly head when a soundtrack release goes wrong. I don't ever want to be on the receiving end of that, so I try to make sure that everything that I do is up to as high a standard as I can possibly do.
Did I don't know if I misunderstood this in the panel, but it sounds like there can be even like track errors from the original source, like there's like interference from the game itself.
Yeah, that's something I've encountered on a number of different projects, actually. So in the panel, I highlighted two of them, one being Phantasy Star 2, and the other being Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes, both of which I've worked on the audio for the releases. Yeah, like it's certainly possible for bugs to creep into video games, and especially with the music. And they sit there practically unnoticed for decades in a lot of cases. Until someone like myself comes along to dig into it and try to trace down what's going on. In the case of Phantasy Star 2, there is a different soundtrack in the Japanese version, and it's the same compositions, but the drum samples are different to the extent where they actually sound unbearably loud, really. But ignoring that difference, the instrument errors and the bug isn't present in that one. So you kind of have this reference to compare against to let you know that, hey, there's something not quite right here, right? If it wasn't for that, a person could listen to that music with the bugs that I pointed out and not realize anything was wrong. It's not until you have that, solid reference that you can refer to. And it's the same case with Dragon Slayer Legend of Heroes. The bugs that are present in that are something that seemingly is existing in the actual version of the game that was released for the PC 98. The PC 88 version, which is the original version of the game that was released first, doesn't have the bug. And it seems like when they ported it to the newer hardware a few years later, some sort of corruption was introduced or data got lost somewhere. And a number of the songs in the panel that I highlighted, the opening song, but also the ending tune, also has a very similar bug where the one of the instruments with the third pulse channel just drops out and gets replaced with repeating humming noises, right? And again, if you didn't have the golden reference of another version of the game to go by, you would never be able to catch something like this, right?
Yeah, my question was going to be like, when does it become like you're interpreting almost like what it was supposed to be?
So there is actually a case where I've had to do that. I've had to make my own kind of judgment call. Unfortunately, I can't disclose the soundtrack that it was for, but I guess I can talk about it in general terms. There's one that exists that I was recording the soundtrack for, and it's a particular game published by, I can't say who it was published by, but published on the SNES. And there's a song where there is a well-known glitch. It's called like an echo buffer overflow. And a sample gets completely trashed in the middle of the song playback. And every version of the game that you play has this bug. It's just like a common sound error bug, like a sound engine bug. I know how to fix it. I could have fixed it for the recording, but I wasn't sure what was the actual, like what was the intent there. So in that particular case, I was actually asked to provide both a fixed and unfixed version of the recording, and the label passed it off to the copyright holder and asked them to choose which one they wanted to use. Now, in the end, I believe that the song in question isn't actually going to be on the release anyway, because the release is intended to be a compilation of sorts rather than a definitive, complete soundtrack. But yeah, going back, your question was like, have I ever had to make a judgment call like that? And yeah, I have. I've had to make decisions whether or not I thought something sounded right and whether or not I could fix it.
Is this kind of stuff like, would your average music fan hear the difference in a rip to a regular game? Or you know what I mean? I didn't phrase that well.
Yeah, I know what you're asking there. Like, would the average listener be able to tell the difference with some of these cases? Some cases, yes. Like, there are like audible, noticeable glitches. Like if a sound sample gets corrupted and it gets replaced with noise and distortion, yeah, you can tell. But there's other cases where like the errors that you'll find are just like a little bit more subtle. Like I worked on the Breath of Fire 2 soundtrack recording, and I had to record that soundtrack myself 3 separate times before I got a version that I personally was satisfied with, because the reverb in the music on a handful of songs didn't turn out right because of the way that I was getting the game to play back the songs. I noticed the issue. after several hours of working on it. I can't say that the average listener would have. I can't say for certain whether or not that would be the case. I mean, a diehard fan who has like listened to that music in and out for years would probably be able to notice the difference right away. But like the average fan who's dropping a needle on a vinyl record and listening to it, I can't say if they would notice that a reverb sample or the echo on a particular song was just 2 decibels too quiet or something like that. But in my role, I have to care about this stuff. So like I said, I ended up recording that soundtrack 3 separate times because I wasn't initializing the reverb settings correctly.
So I mean, obviously, your ears are just like super well tuned to the. I mean, you've done this a long time, but I guess like when you're listening to any old music, whether games or not, like do you just pick up on like, oh, that's that echo buffer or whatever? Like,
it depends. I mean, I can switch off. I can listen to things with a more casual ear and just enjoy the music for what it is. I mean, like I'm not like super picky. Like I don't fire up my hardware for every video game soundtrack that I want to listen to personally. Like I'll do what the rest of us do and like fire up YouTube or like a site like VGMrips.net and be completely satisfied with what I hear for casual listening. But again, like when I'm doing this work, I have to like put on my best headphones, silence everything around me, and I pour over every ounce of detail. Like I'm listening to things dozens of times, sometimes at different speeds, sometimes with different filters applied, all just so that I can analyze the audio that I'm listening to and like make sure that like the most tiniest detail is as correct as I can make it. Let's put it that way.
Last February, switching gears a bit here, last February you recorded a version of the Sonic Eraser soundtrack for Dwelling of Duels.
I did.
And some of the comments about that sound, mostly the soundtrack itself, not your version, were not kind.
No, and that was my entire intent behind.
That was the question: is whether you expected that or not.
Well, no, I deliberately I encountered the song probably the same way the majority of us did. So if you're not familiar with that particular tune from Sonic Eraser, or I mean even the game Sonic Eraser, I mean who could blame you? It's like probably the most obscure Sonic game that exists. But the soundtrack for that game frequently turns up on lists of the worst VGM. And I stumbled upon one of these compilations I think it was something like the worst video game music from the best video game series or something like that. And this particular song was highlighted, and I think there was one particular comment that I read that was something akin, like there's a particular sound in it, and someone compared it to getting smacked in the head with an iron frying pan. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I have to cover this song. So that song has been on like a list of things that I would want to cover. And so that particular Dwelling of Duels month was Brevity Month. The idea being your song that you submit for your cover that you submit has to be 60 seconds or less. I don't think anybody could stomach the Sonic Eraser music for longer than 60 seconds. So I was like, perfect. I can bang out a quick cover of that. So that cover was a chiptune plus live guitar. I'm not very much of a guitarist, but the parts of that song were simple. And again, it was only 60 seconds. I could just, I could stomach my way through punching in a whole bunch of takes for that. But yeah, it's funny that you call out that of all of the pieces of music that I've worked on, like literally the most obscure cover that I've ever done.
Well, here's another. You say I didn't say that. Guitar is not your forte. What about singing? Or you were in a Mini Bosses song, which I think is amazing.
Oh yeah. So I contributed the last 2 or 3 minutes to a. Oh wait, okay. Hold on here. Are you referring to the Mini Bosses Batman?
That's the one I'm thinking of.
Okay. So because I've contributed to 2 different Mini Bosses related things. Oh. Yeah. So that was the one that you're referring to was literally just a vocal sample at the end of it. That particular song ends with it's actually a friend of mine who left a pretty legendary voicemail, we'll say.
Okay.
So that ended up, like the original version of this ended up on the Mini Bosses Brass 2 album. Fast forward a year or two, there was a compilation coming out. Mini Bosses wanted to contribute a new version of that song with vocals, and they asked people to submit their own version of that voicemail, and they turned that into a rather interesting sounding sound collage, which ended the new version of the song. So I play a small role in that. But I thought you were referring to another mini bosses related thing that I contributed to. So last year, one of the former members of the mini bosses had to get some cancer treatment. And in order to raise funds and to lift his spirits, a number of mini bosses fans and friends put together their own compilation album, basically covering the mini bosses cover library, basically. So like doing their own version of songs that the mini bosses, the band, have covered. So my band Martial Art contributed covers of the Mega Man 2 Wily stage and ending music, which closed out the compilation. Cool. That's what I thought you were referring to, because that's probably the easiest and least obscure mini bosses thing. How you found out about that weird Batman cover with the sound collage at the end of it that I contributed to. How you found out about that, I have no clue.
Well, I love the mini bosses, and the Batman song's actually really good. I had never heard it before.
Yeah, I love that particular cover, and the one with the lyrics.
Yes, that's the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah. I could say the name of the original artist. I Hate You When You're Pregnant is the name of the band that wrote those lyrics years and years ago. I mean, that song has its own lore at this point.
So a couple of things, sorry to make it a bit about myself here, but a couple of things related to what we were just talking about. So as far as the voicemail, so yes. My friends and I, like my core group of friends, we've all been we're old now, but when we were younger, we were in like punk bands and whatnot. And one of our friends left a voicemail that to us was legendary. Unfortunately, it got deleted from a phone. Like, we were 100%, it was like, this has to go on an album. The short version is he got into a fight with a guy. I'm not condoning fighting. I don't fight. Nobody should fight. But he kind of got into a fight with a guy, and he had this 30-minute, portrayal of how it happened with this really high pitch at one point. He called me a bitch. So that's basically the same sort of origin for this particular voicemail, but yeah, continue. Well, that unfortunately got lost. It would have been the perfect thing to put at the end of an album. But as far as Mega Man 2 as well, there's a local band here in Winnipeg. I don't think they play anymore, not for years, called Electro Quarterstaff, and I think I've mentioned this on the show before. They're like a hardcore proggy kind of band, and they did originals generally, but they did a version of Dr. Wily that they didn't necessarily want to become as popular as it did, and it got to the point where shows, people were just like, play Dr. Wily, and they hated it.
Because that's not the first time I've heard of stories like that, where a band or an artist who is trying to further a career performing music that they write and compose themselves, they do a cover of something, and that cover gets incredible amounts of traction that their normal material wouldn't. I've heard of that happen so many times, and you'd actually I think there's a large number of people in the current video game cover community who have origin stories similar to that, where they've started off with the goal of doing an original music project. They do one cover for fun and realize, oh crap, people are enjoying this. I should do more of this. That happens so often.
Yeah, that actually happened to Theology, who is a friend of the show and a friend of mine. We did a panel together at VGM together, and that's how he got into the scene.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show how supportive and how passionate fans of video game music can be, right? They see a new artist put out a song and they just latch onto it and embrace it and encourage it so much. I know my own band, Martial Art, we get a lot more traction with our video game covers than we do with our original music, which is completely fine with us. When we started off, from the very beginning, wanting to do both originals and covers like that. So, it works for us.
Does every member of Martial Art, now Martial, by the way, is spelled like Marshall Stack, not like
That's
the
correct.
martial arts.
Yes.
Does every member believe, incorrectly I may say, that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3 is better than Turtles in Time?
It's something you have to agree to implicitly. If you don't believe that with every fiber of your being, you can't be in the band.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have.
But are you saying that you personally enjoy Turtles in Time more than
Turtles in Time is an all-time favorite. I have it downstairs right now. I love that game. I love all the Turtles games, but I would rank them Turtles in Time, Turtles 2 or the arcade, whatever, then Manhattan Project.
Oh,
and then
no,
whatever.
I mean, it could be my own personal like nostalgia bias or whatever, because I had Manhattan Project when I was a kid and my brother did. That soundtrack is like top tier NES music for me. Like if I had to list like my top 10 favorite VGM soundtracks, that one would be, if not first, then easily second. I go back and forth between that one and Gimmick, which is my top video game soundtrack. Now, gameplay wise, I do agree that Turtles in Time is like it has a bit more refined mechanics. It has like a tighter selection of levels. I agree, but music wise, soundtrack wise, TMNT3 NES all the way.
Well, we're gonna have to agree to disagree, because actually, I would put Turtles in Time soundtrack wise as definitely in my top 5.
It's definitely up there. Like I can't deny that it's a great soundtrack. I would count it among my favorites, but 3 edges it out. Sorry.
Speaking of your brother, when you were a kid, your brother gave you an NES controller, convinced you were playing, like, controlling Tails in Sonic 2. So I have to ask, have you ever done anything like that to your kids?
Yes. Yeah. So I have a 3-year-old who enjoys the concept of playing games, but isn't quite there in terms of, just the skill level needed to, accurately play one and make progress with it. So there was this one particular instance where I fired up I think the game was called Monster Truck Rally for the NES. Kid is obsessed with trucks, monster trucks, all that. So it was a logical fit there. I mean, it's not the greatest game, but it has a CPU driver basically, and you can configure the game. Like the game's menu is like huge for some ridiculous reason. I have no idea why. You can configure the game so that the only player present is the computer-driven player, and I turned that on and handed my son the controller and let him go.
Similarly, and again, I've told this on the show before, a nephew of mine, this was a few years back, he was like 2, likes soccer, likes cars, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I like Rocket League, turned it on, and he grabbed the controller. The funny part of that was he grabbed the controller but looked at like a real soccer ball in my home and couldn't figure out why he wasn't doing anything to it.
Rocket League is another one. I've definitely given my son the controller for Rocket League and put it in one of those practice modes and just like let him flail around. Mm-hmm. But at one point, I definitely gave him a controller that was not actually connected and drove around for him, just so he could get a feel for what the game was actually supposed to do. I think he was only like maybe just under 2 at the time, so I mean, can't really expect him to do much. But he was excited for scoring a goal, and he wanted to do it again and couldn't do it. So I gave him the experience of scoring a goal, or at least thinking he did. Now he's going to do his research similar to you did and find this podcast in like decades time, and his world is going to be shattered when he realizes he didn't actually score those practice goals that he thought he did when he was 2.
Are your kids into your music? Like when they hear it on the radio, which martial art has been played on the radio, like are they like, wow, cool? There
have been times where I've played our music in the house and have seen some pretty enthusiastic responses. My kids like enjoy video game music in general. Like my youngest is just turned 1 this past October, and last week I was playing the Fantasy Zone soundtrack, like the arcade Fantasy Zone soundtrack, and he crawled into the room with this like huge smile on his face, sat down right in front of the speaker, and was like air drumming / dancing to the opening, like what's the Opa Opa from Fantasy Zone. And yeah, my kids are going to be music nerds like me, I'm sure of it.
I don't think they have a choice.
It just comes with the territory. You grew up in this household, and yeah. Maybe it's genetic, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Well, going back to you as a kid, we'll get there actually. So you're obviously where you are now, but martial arts' first live performance was at MagFest 12 in 2014.
That's correct.
Your first full-length album, Skywave Effect, released in 2010. So we've had a long time since then, but a long time before that even, when you were a kid, you were doing this recording of video game music. You used a Play School cassette recorder to record the music from the TV, which I do think, some of us are familiar with, like, recording off the radio or whatever that way.
And it's honestly a common experience. Like, I've talked to, like there's members of martial art, like some of the people that we collaborate with. My friend Corey Johnson, for example, has told me that he has the same memory of holding up a microphone from a kid's cassette recorder, like one of those ones with the little handheld microphone, holding it up to the TV and recording music from games. I think he actually might have also recorded Sonic 2 music the same way I did. But yeah, I would make myself mixtapes by holding up this dinky little microphone cassette recorder up to the TV, and like I had tapes of like cartoon themes that I would tape and video game music.
How much of a stickler were you? Would you listen back and be like, oh no, too much reverb?
Well, I think I did at an early-ish age pick up that it could sound better, because I also have memories of being at my grandfather's house, and he had a cassette recorder with an audio input on the back. And I remember being, I don't want to say how old I was. I don't remember exactly how old I was. I definitely wasn't like 3 or 4. I might have been like 6 or 7 at that point. But I remember plugging in the NES audio output into the back of this cassette recorder and recording directly to cassette that way. I think I had Mario 3 world music, Mario 3 music recorded that way.
This is a very cliche question, but I'll ask it anyway. What would you say now to younger you, the one who was recording off the TV like that?
I keep it up.
Fair enough. You did it.
Honestly, well, exactly, right? Like, it doesn't matter how good it sounded or anything like that. I don't have any advice for him like that. Like, I think what I was doing as a kid is really, set me on the path that I'm on now, and I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I mean, I also look back at like what I was doing with like electronics when I was a kid. Like, I remember being pre-teen age, they maybe like 10 or 11, and getting this like 101 or 1001 electronics kit where you could put together circuits and stuff like that. And here I am decades later. I've got an electrical engineering degree, and I work on circuit boards and computer hardware for my career. Like, I think my childhood has really set the trajectory for my adult life, and I have no advice for my past self other than maybe be like a little bit less awkward, work on your social skills a little bit. But in terms of your hobbies and what you do for fun, yeah, keep it up.
What about any plans to bring back your internet radio show, Open Circuit?
Thought about it. I've had the idea in the back of my head to do some form of online music broadcast. The thing is, like, Open Circuit and Arecibo Radio at the time, that existed in a space where video streaming, a space and time where video streaming wasn't quite as easy and accessible. I think Twitch streaming had begun, and there were sites like Ustream and all that allowed you to host streams, but streaming your own content just wasn't as widespread and easy to do as it is currently. And I think audio only radio broadcasts kind of like fell out of favor once video streaming became a thing. Now, I do have friends from back then who still continue with their radio broadcasts. A good friend of mine, Kyle JCRB, still hosts a broadcast called Nitro Game Injection. And that is his like passion project. Like, he's running his own radio server. He's got like a website that hosts multiple podcast networks, kind of thing. And I think if I was to jump on and do my own radio show again, like, I would definitely be collaborating and partnering with his work again, just because he's already put in a lot of the work to get the infrastructure up and running. But yeah, if I was to bring it back, I don't think it would be in the same format that I used to do. I think I would have to do something that's a little bit more focused because Open Circuit was basically a musical variety show in a way. Like I would play video game covers, shifting music, electronic music, but also just like whatever I wanted to. That was like one of the beauties of this online radio streaming. You had the freedom to play whatever you want, whenever you wanted, basically. Not to say that it was all above board copyright wise, but we don't have to talk about that. But yeah, I think if I was to do a broadcast just to retain an audience now, I think I would want to tailor it down to something a little bit more niche or something a little bit more themed. It's one of those ideas that's in the back of my head that I want to do, but I feel like my free time right now, being a dad of two and having a band and having all these recording projects and all that, I think my free time, I don't have the same free time that I used to.
Fair enough. What about, along the same lines, the Retro Game Audio Podcast? Did you ever do a host an episode? Because you were going to.
Yeah, that's kind of still in the works. Like we myself and Steve, the other host, have discussed on a number of occasions plans to record an episode when the right topic comes our way. We've got like an ideas board filled with potential topics to talk about, potential soundtracks to dive deep into. It's going to happen. I can't say when. I think the announcement of the revival but me taking over the co-host role was maybe just a touch premature. Again, it comes down to free time, because not only am I a dad of two, Steve, the other host, is also a dad of two kids about the same age as mine, and also has his own projects in terms of composing, also has his own day job. So finding the time where our schedules align and can intersect in a way has been a bit of a challenge. But it's one of those things that we both know that we still want to do. We're still really passionate about it. It's just like stars haven't quite aligned just yet.
Before I bring it back to game soundtracks, I did want to ask one thing about visuals and the artwork you do, live visuals, that is. So I saw your performance at Bonus Stage Van, and
Yes.
it was Bucky O'Hare, which awesome game.
Yep.
You had footage of Bucky O'Hare being played. Is that you playing? Are you required to beat a game to get the visuals you need?
So that is not an example of my work, unfortunately.
Oh no.
The video that you're referring to, the performance you're referring to, was kind of like a martial art, I want to say side project in a way. It was kind of conceived as a way for my my bandmate Mikhail, who was living in Moscow at the time, now is currently, due to the obvious reasons that should be obvious to anybody who's followed any sort of news recently, is now out of Russia. He's currently living in Israel. But yeah, it was meant to be a venue for him, a platform for him to perform video game covers without the larger band. So he prepared a set of material. I provided the chiptune backing track, so I was involved with it. But the video material was his own creation, basically. And because it was, meant for a Eastern European audience, we'll say, a lot of the video references were things. I mean, gameplay footage was one, but there were things that were in the videos that were very tailored to that particular audience, like clips from relevant TV shows and movies, and references that would fly over the head of the average North American watcher. But yeah. So yeah, that was actually a fun project, and it's something that we do want to revive in some way. Because we have probably an album and a half's worth of video game cover material that we've arranged for that project that we haven't recorded and released in an official way yet. So yeah, we should probably get on that.
Well, I apologize for asking about something that wasn't yours.
Well, it allowed me to talk about something that was mine. Yeah.
Well, how many soundtracks? I know you have a vast vinyl collection. How many soundtracks from games do you own that you have from the game that you've never played? Oh, that was hard to get out.
So which soundtracks do I own from games I've never played? Honestly, I own more soundtracks than games that I've probably played. I feel like there's a lot of cases where I've got into games because of the music. I discovered the soundtrack first. And because like I'm already familiar with a lot of these like video game labels, I check out like whenever they announce something, I check out the soundtrack before I check out the game. And if the music appeals to me, I'll buy it no matter what. Like even if I haven't played the game. Now, obviously there's some exceptions to that. Like I have played like all of Castlevania series, so I have all those records and all that. But like there's stuff that I've worked on, soundtracks that I've put together that for games that I've never played, for consoles that I never owned. Like, would you believe that I never owned a PlayStation 1 until I was asked to work on Mega Man Legends 2?
I don't believe it.
You don't believe so that recording was sourced from a PlayStation 1 that I've modified it so it doesn't really matter, but like I bought it on Facebook Marketplace like the week that I was asked to record the soundtrack. I had never owned one. I could probably count in like individual hours the amount of time that I've played a PlayStation. I'm honestly like not that much of a gamer. I'm like I play time to time, but like I'm all about the music more than the games themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So would you even from a young age, was it like I'm way more into the music than I am the game?
I mean, I grew up in a small town, and we only had like a NES and a Sega Genesis, which broke when I was a teenager. So my gaming experience when I was like a pretty young kid was limited to just like the handful of games that we had and could get. Like there wasn't an opportunity to rent very much where I was like, and especially for consoles that we didn't have, and yeah, like getting a new video game was kind of like a rare treat. I guess I did have a Game Boy and a Game Boy Advance, which gave me some, but I mean my collection was definitely only in like the single digits of games, and like I didn't have the opportunity to buy very many. Like the nearest Walmart, the nearest store from where I lived was like 2 hours away. So yeah, like I didn't do all that much gaming when I was a kid.
One thing I gleaned from the Video Game Grooves podcast, which you did not that long ago, I believe.
A couple months ago, yeah.
Are you going to be the one to finally make a vinyl soundtrack for Project S11? I
would love to. That is top tier Game Boy music. Like if I had to pick out any Game Boy soundtrack to be asked to work on, that would be it. And I'm hoping now that Ship to Shore has kind of cracked the door open with Sunsoft and gotten to work on the Gimmick and Journey to Silius and Euphoria soundtracks, I'm hoping that once those are out into the wild, that they can go back and say, hey, you published this obscure game back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Can we do that soundtrack too? Because honestly, if you're not familiar with that music, like just look up Project S11 for the Game Boy, and it's mind-blowing how rich the sound is, but how I find like a lot of times music is either like technically good in terms of like programming tricks and things like that, but maybe misses the mark in terms of like good composition and catchy melodies and stuff like that. This one, like some of the songs on it just like straddle that line perfectly, where they're like the musicianship and melody and the composition is catchy and intricate and cool, but the programming is just mind-blowing. Like the technical tricks that soundtrack pulls off it's unlike almost anything else in the Game Boy and Game Boy Color library. So yeah, I would jump at the opportunity to work on that. And there's a handful of other games that I would love to be asked to do the kind of work for. Like I've got my own little like personal list of things that if I ever see a rumbling of any label talking about working on any of these franchises or anything like that, I'm going to like personally reach out and say, hey, I want to work on the audio for this. I will do it for you.
And then the last thing I'll ask about, just a silly question here. Martial Art got locked out of Twitter because of a baby shark toy.
Yes. Do I really need to elaborate on this?
You don't have to. Basically, I mean, if you want, I will. Your baby shark toy was considered non-consensual nudity?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a video that I recorded of my kid's baby shark toy. Batteries were dying, and it was making like some kind of cool sounds. Actually, like it was just like this weird, distorted, almost like if you're familiar with the sound of like a circuit bent toy. That's what this thing sounded like, and it kind of had this like odd rhythmic musical quality to it. And I thought it was like it sounded cool, and I posted the video up, and like within seconds, our account got locked because we tripped off some sort of automatic content matching because of non-consensual nudity that was in our video, and it just boggled my mind.
And it was a whole thing, eh? Like you were trying to advertise for performances and
like we were. There was a video of ours that was going to be premiering on a live stream within weeks of that, and I think we were going to be performing on one of the bonus stage streams around the same time, and I was using our Twitter account to like negotiate for like artwork for some of our releases at the time too, completely locked out of all of it. And like I actually had to like fire up my personal Twitter account, which I barely ever use, and like reach out to some people and say, hey, so Twitter is being a dick right now, and we can't access our conversation. But this is still me. Like I'm the one trying to buy artwork from you. Yeah. over like the most innocent video. Like if anybody saw the video and listened to it, if any human saw it, they'd be like, okay, this is harmless. And yet, again, some automated Twitter bot within seconds decided, no, this was not allowed. And and the thing is, I'm still not really happy with how that got resolved, because the Twitter appeals process for anything like that is just like painfully slow. Never really got a response back that was from a human. It was clearly like a copy and pasted response. And in the end, we just ended up saying, we acknowledge that we screwed up, even though we didn't.
Right. I've heard that before, and that is weird that, like, to resolve it, you need to be like, it was our fault. Yeah,
it's our fault that your system detected an innocent video as non-consensual nudity. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I hadn't thought about that. I had forgotten about that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Well, maybe this is even worse, but that's where we're going to end this.
Of all the things to end on, can you come up with one more question that we can talk about?
Okay, sure. I will. I mean, you may have hinted at a few already, but what is your all-time favorite game soundtrack?
Ooh, all-time favorite. Like I said earlier, it hovers between Ninja Turtles 3 for the NES and Gimmick for the Famicom.
Gimmick, that's the one I thought you'd say. Then you came at me with this Manhattan Project stuff.
Yeah, well, they kind of like fulfill two different needs, because like Ninja Turtles 3 is a game that I played a lot as a kid. Like it's one of the few that I played as a kid anyway. One of the 5 or 6 games that we had. And I've played it a lot. Like it's one of those soundtracks that has been part of me since I was a kid. I've enjoyed it since I was a kid. And one of the ones that I recorded to a cassette with a play school recorder, all that. But Gimmick was something that I didn't discover until, I want to say 10 years ago, 10, maybe 15 years ago, like already well into my adult life. And I didn't discover it from the game. Like many of my VGM discoveries, it was completely independent of the game. It was just the music itself. The music is just so good, and it stands head and shoulders above and beyond a lot of the, I was going to say everything that's on the console, but I mean, a lot of other video game music in general, just in terms of like how catchy the music is, how well orchestrated it is, especially considering the limitations of the hardware at the time. It's just damn good music in and of itself. And honestly, it's one of those things that when I got asked to work on the audio for recording for the upcoming vinyl release, it was just like one of those things where like my heart skipped a beat, because it's just like it's incredible really to be asked to be involved in archiving and preserving the music, that like a piece of music, an album's worth of music that like I love it's really dear to my heart. So of those are probably my 2 favorite soundtracks: Ninja Turtles 2 and Ninja Turtles 3 and Gimmick. Top 3, if I had to pick a third one, I've been listening to a game called Waterworld. A lot lately. And it's like, again, I have no nostalgia for the game, haven't played it, but the music, it's composed by a guy, it's a Western composer by the name of Dean Evans. And he must have been like a demo scene guy or something like that, because like the music is just like so well programmed for the console. It's just like head and shoulders above a lot of other SNES music. And there's a song that is a part of that soundtrack that you're probably going to hear Martial Art cover in within the next couple of years or so, if anything goes as planned.
All right. Well, people can check out Martial Art at SHALLART.band. You can find our guest, j-m-r.net. And if you want to know more about Gimmick and a little more nitty-grit about the process of this making good VGM rips, if you will, then check out the VGM Together 2 on Twitch. The Panels Day 3 is where you can find it. Jeff Roberts, JMR, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem. We'd like to also mention that that panel is now available on YouTube. So if you're not looking to browse through 10 hours worth of Twitch VODs trying to find it, it's up on the Martial Art Band YouTube channel right now.